Hi, Keith.
Hello, Aaron. Love the timing.
So funny.
We're just out of sync.
Keith in Sydney.
And Aaron over there in Christchurch.
That's right. We're going to do our very best to facilitate a perfect recording, even though we are trying to connect and communicate effectively across the ditch. Ditch being the gap between New Zealand and Australia, which is quite a significant ditch.
Technology there, right? How many?
Technology.
2,000K? Is it 2,000K? And yet it's almost instantaneous.
Yeah.
Close to instantaneous communication. That's amazing. Almost. Yeah.
Yeah. So
there's a slight gap, but it's not perceptible.
So you were going to, you had an idea of what we were going to talk about tonight.
Yes.
What is that, Keith?
So it's a proposition.
Yep.
It could be overly simplistic, but I think it's worth exploring. The idea, the proposition is that what's missing in the world is the ability and the willingness to push people in the direction they're already going. And we'll expand upon that. So push, shove, knock, gently coerce, nudge, any of these words, because if you're going in the same direction, it doesn't matter what sort of force you use.
Give me an example. Give me an example where it's not happening.
An example where it's not happening. Do you want shallow waters, or shall we dive in?
All the way.
All the way? Okay. One example of going all the way, diving all the way in. Let's take alcoholism. Now, a person with good intentions, I could have very good intentions, and think, oh, I've got to stop this person and their alcoholism. But if the trajectory that they're going in is alcoholism, the notion that I'm presenting, the proposition is, let's push them further into alcoholism.
Right.
Now,
so that's you're going to make a lot of friends with that one, Keith. You're going to make a lot of friends with the alcohol companies for a start.
Well, for anyone that finds
what's your logic with it?
Yeah, for anyone that finds the notion gives them a bad taste in the mouth. So with alcohol, people use alcohol, and alcohol is an extreme use of this substance to achieve really resourceful states of mind that they think they can't achieve without the substance.
So if they want to go for relaxation, what do you mean by that? What's resourceful?
If they want relaxation, if they want sociability, if they want to, put the working day to rest because it's been too much. The thoughts are too quick. They're overwhelmed by thinking. These are just 3 or 4 possible purposes that alcohol could serve these people. So the trajectory that they want to go in is to get back into a state of mind that for them is fun, resourceful, lets them achieve more. And I could have really good intentions and say, well, I've got to stop you from doing this because you're damaging yourself. So on the one hand, yes, the alcohol is a poison. It will damage the person physiologically. On the other hand, it's allowing them to do things that they think they can't do in conscious awareness, in sobriety. So
in normal conscious awareness, they can't do the things that alcohol they believe alcohol can do for them.
Yeah. So I could have good intentions, go, right, I've got to stop this person. And I could go, right, why don't you take up jogging instead? Or just give the alcohol away altogether and take up Jesus or yoga or free diving.
Take up Jesus.
I thought you were laughing at the yoga.
No, I just never heard someone. Have you thought about taking up Jesus? It's not quite the same as taking up yoga, is it? It's kind of a little bit different. Anyway.
Taking up Jesus.
Yeah. Now, where is he in the phone book? Oh, okay. J for Jesus. Here we go. There's quite a few of them, aren't there?
Always Jesus. So that's we're diving in deep, and that's one example that people would be taken aback by, I think, because you've got to help these people out of the alcoholism. But what if alcohol is serving them really, really well? I'm proposing we can actually push in that same direction. Now, what's the logic?
What if it's not serving them really well?
Oh, but it is. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. Let's say
you're talking about understanding the distinctions between the mechanics or the structure of an unconscious, let's call it addictive behavior. The distinction between that and what we socially perceive as a useful behavior. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's important to make that distinction clear, because it could otherwise, because so what you're saying is, at a certain level, the unconscious, that part that drives so many mechanisms, so many processes in our physiology, trillions of neural synapses every moment, that unconscious mechanism is actually getting, or believes it's getting, something out of this specific behavior, in this case called alcoholism or alcoholic.
Yeah.
And yet socially we're going, well, that person drinks a lot, they're going to get really unwell, or that when that person drinks, and then they go driving, or that person gets abusive, or that person just gets really depressed, or whatever it might be. There's a social perception which doesn't fit with what we want in our society, in a apparently happy, healthy society.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's look a little bit at the logic. For example, if I say to you, Aaron, you should give one of your kidneys to someone needy. Now, you've got two well-functioning kidneys. You're going to balk at the idea of me saying something that you should do. You're going to go, your immediate reaction is going to go, wait a second, they're mine, they're inside me, and they're working really well, and you're telling me to do something. So the immediate reaction from you is going to be resistance to my suggestion. Aaron, you should give away one of your kidneys. You've got two. You can spare one. So this whole notion is about avoiding resistance. If I push someone in a direction they don't want to go, they're going to push back. If I push someone in a direction they're already going, there's absolutely no resistance. So if I meet someone at...
Understood.
So what was that? Yeah. So if I understood, yeah. So if I meet someone where they are, if they're drinking heavily, and I meet them where they are, guess what? I'm not going to get any resistance. If I say, wow, big drinker, must feel good, that state of mind where you can just relax, or you can just talk to people again, because you can't do that when you're sober, or you can calm, or the thoughts stop, those crazy thoughts stop.
Yeah.
And they're on board straight away. So alcoholism is obviously extreme, but you can apply this to anything. the instances, and I'm guilty of this too. Probably guilty is probably not the best word, but out of habit, someone says something, and I quite easily say something to rebuke it, give an opposite opinion, suggest that maybe there's another way of thinking. It's never a
You don't
start.
have children, do you? You don't have children, do you, Keith? You don't
They
by
remind me that
chance
I
have
don't.
two
They
daughters,
remind
do
me
you?
that I don't. Yeah, well, any suggestion that there's another way of thinking always can, not always, it invites resistance. And this is where I'm going with this notion of pushing people, nudging people, gently assisting people in the direction they're already going. And I see this all the time. And if I take my own personal examples, my daughters might say something that's completely in opposition to something that I might think.
Mm.
And the first thing that comes out of my mouth is what I think. The first thing that comes out of my mouth isn't, that's what you think. That's really interesting.
Why is that,
Because what they've
Keith?
said, well, I've explored this a lot.
Well, you've just explained it. It's because you have your own bias, and what they say doesn't fit with your bias, and you've got to confirm your bias by arguing for your spot, for your belief.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was something like fight or flight. So someone says something. So it used to be, however long ago, when we didn't have language, the fight or flight was because a hippo just came through the bushes, one of the most fearsome creatures on the planet. You either ran or you stayed and fought. Now, so since language and since all of these ideas that we've developed and very complex thought processes, it doesn't necessarily have to be a hippo. It can just be an idea that can send me into fight or flight.
Yeah.
So, one of my girls can present an idea and boom, I'm there. It's like, oh, my world's going to fall apart because that's not the way I think.
Yeah.
Instead of a relaxed response, that's interesting.
Well, the other thing is they haven't asked you to do anything about their thought process. They haven't asked you for your opinion or for or what would you do if you were to, Dad, how do I change my thought process? It's not working for me right now. I guess the interesting thing, if we go back to the alcoholism, by the time someone gets to the AA or the whatever it is, which will then tell them to stop, they've usually gotten to a point where they have personally recognized that this is no longer serving them, or enough people around them have recognized that this isn't serving them, or the government, i.e. the police, have recognized, and he's being told you have to do this or else. But there's the challenge there is that even in that situation, they're not going to, there's a resistance until, in case of the 12 steps, for example, you are literally confronted. I remember I was 21 and I traveled to the US on my own. My aunt and uncle lived in New Jersey, and my uncle lived in worked on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And so I traveled across on the Greyhound, but I actually ended up staying in Manhattan with a New Zealand woman in one of her flats, which was Spanish Harlem. And I met a guy whose name was Rick Shapiro. And Rick Shapiro, great name, was an actor, or getting started in acting, which so many people were, of course. But he was also a user. And so one night he said, I won't do his accent, but he said, come to an NA meeting with me. I said, what's NA? I'd never even heard of AA when I was in New Zealand. And he says, no, I think I had heard of, I didn't know what NA was. It was, I was Narcotics Anonymous. So, oh, wow. So we went down to Greenwich Village, and we were in the shopping. Well, it's all shopping, really, shopping in apartments. But we went downstairs. So we go, and there was this huge, big space down, like a big basement area, where this NA group met. And there had to be 50, 60 people there. And it was really profoundly interesting in the sense that the only way I could put it is really there was a huge degree of gravity, meaning that all of these people were there with this major problem, and they were all in front of the guy who was running it, who was obviously had overcome his problem, and he was running the meeting. And everyone there was a confirmed, hi everyone, my name's Dave, for example, and I'm a blah, blah, blah. And all around the walls were all the 12 steps and, pictures of people with success. So there was a huge amount of almost like religious gravity around the whole thing. You as soon as you're there, you kind of go, wow, wow, this is, the air was, I had to leave actually after about half an hour, because it became very obvious that I was not. And Rick looked at me sideways and said, I won't do his accent, but he said, you maybe should leave, because seriously, they know you're not an addict. And I said, how do you know? I said, but they know you're not an addict. But so you're allowed to bring guests, but you should have really bring guests who needed help, not someone who's just kind of, But it was just, I think that whole, so for example, in that environment,
that's just funny environment.
it was religious. It was quite a religious, and a lot of people are brought to Christianity through the 12 steps. A lot of people are brought to a Christianity, almost religious-like set of principles which they follow. A lot are brought to, and I shakily say this, but I mean a lot are also brought to a very addictive requirement, which is to have a very close person who oversees your day-to-day experiences and is always, I can't remember what, a sponsor. So they have a sponsor, and the sponsor is always at your beck and call. And I mean, this guy is Rick. He would sometimes call his sponsor at 2-3 a.m. in the morning, 4 or 5 times. So it's like this. They couldn't live without their sponsor, which is kind of like quite an addictive behavior in some ways. And it was quite. But
is that in the years or years later?
Yeah. So I don't know why I brought that up, but it was just the but so that's why I brought it up, was the density of everything that came before to become this thing called the 12 steps or the AA or the NA program kind of was quite overpowering. And so it'd be quite easy, if you're in that very unstable state of recognizing that you're doing something that is really ultimately destroying you. It's easy when there's this, mammoth beast bearing down on you to go, okay, I'll do as you say, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so many repeatedly, fall off the wagon and then have to start again. And that's because
it's interesting. It's interesting you bring up the 12 steps. This goes in some way to reinforce my notion of nudging people in the direction they're already going. When you go to a 12-step program, they don't say stop. They don't say stop doing the thing. They say, the first thing they say is, are you ready to acknowledge you are, whatever it is?
And that's another problem in itself.
That's problematic in itself. But at the very least, the intention is, if you acknowledge it, you're actually nudging them in the same direction.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Rather than, you can say, no, you're not this thing. You're acknowledging, yes, I'm an alcoholic. Yes, I'm a narcotics user. Yes, I'm a whatever. Sex addict. How many 12 steps are there? So the acknowledgement isn't telling them to stop. It's nudging them in the same direction. Yes, I'm this thing. What do I do next?
Mm.
So there's no resistance, of course, on this thing. You just agreed with where they're at.
Mm.
Are you ready to agree with where you're at? Because I know you're a user. I know you're
Yeah, so that's
a
probably
drinker.
why it's one of the most successful programs.
Yeah, yeah. Until they get to the 12th step and they realize it's not a 13th and they go, oh God, what do I do now?
That's quite funny.
There's a bit of a serious note there, though, because they don't. Because what you said is it becomes addictive in itself, and if you don't have a 13th step, you got to recycle this thing.
Yeah.
And you don't end up with any skill in creating structural change.
Well, it's interesting because the same could be for, like, internet use, and I think the interesting thing around, let's say, let's say, I'm watching it in the behaviour of many teens, and I think I mentioned in the last one, working with a 16-year-old, and the challenge is that they can't give it up. They have to take it to bed with them. They have to be logged in the entire time, and yet the people who design the software are the very first to admit that they won't use it, and are the first to admit that it's the most addictive. It's worse than heroin, in the sense that the gratification is so immediate and it's free, and it's just a dopamine hit every time you flick your thumb. And I'll be first to admit, being an avid creator of digital stuff that I put on Instagram, I'm always looking for different ways of expressing ideas or whatever, or I'm really fascinated by ideas, and yet I am, and I feel like, in general, I feel like I'm learning. Although I just said to my wife before we got online here, I said, I wonder, because the brain is doing a lot of work on these apps. It's doing a lot of work in terms of, like, attention, if you're flicking through TikTok, for example, and you're looking, and it's 15 seconds or maybe even less at sometimes, and you're going through and you see a movie and you watch a movie and then your brain is working so hard to make sense of all this information, and then you flick to the next one, it might be funny. You flick to the next one, it might be political. It might be the next one is fashion. So your brain's constantly working. So could it be that you feel like you're actually doing something important? Could it be that you actually feel like you're educating yourself because, you're seeing, I wonder about that with Instagram. I mean, there's so many things on there where I go, oh, I've seen that before. And, like, why are they repeating this? It's like, I'm not learning anything there. I'm not seeing anything new, but they keep repeating it. And I think, well, but I could, on some of these apps, I'm wondering, could that be almost like a false equivalence or something around, well, I'm doing all this work, so I must be learning. I must be, and I'm not. Whereas 2 or 3 hours just dissolves into the abyss that you'll never get back again.
Yeah.
And that's,
well, if you click, if you clicked on the same video every time, you would very, very quickly get bored and put it down. But because you're clicking on what seems like something unique on each occasion, different person, different background, maybe a different music score, seems like there's something unique there, but they could be repeating the same damn idea each time. And we're looking for the nuance. What's the difference in this? So I think in that sense, you're right that the brain's working hard. Where's the difference? Because I'm starved of difference. But if you literally clicked on the same cat video again and again and again, you go, oh, 10th time, I'm over it. So the brain's looking for something.
I'm like that, the 10th unique cat video, I'm over it already. They're cute as hell, but who cares, Look out the window, there's bound to be a cat somewhere.
Take a video.
But, so the thing that comes to mind straight away when you started down this track was, I guess, what is the the unconscious wanting from this behavior.
Let's go to your teenager, the one addicted to the internet. As a parent or a concerned adult, with the best of intentions, we could go, right, I'm going to take that thing from you. I'm going to take that phone so you get a good night's sleep for once. What have we just done? We've certainly not pushed that person in the direction that they're going. And we're
You can't get the phone anyway. It doesn't matter what you say. You'll never get the phone.
It's stitched. They've sewed it to the palm of their
hand. Yeah. The next one will be, will be literally just stitched in. It'll just be like it'll be like a tattoo phone.
Yeah, your skin will be pixelated.
Yeah.
So with that intention, you've instantly got resistance. So as you're saying, what does the behavior want? We haven't even inquired. In our panic, in our desperation, we just got to take this thing because their health is important. But as soon as you get the resistance, are we going down the path of health or what?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind, and I think it could be a reasonable generalization. The thing that comes to mind that they want, and I get the feeling that this is probably across the board for most of these addictions, is some form of connection. When you take alcohol and to relax, so that you can speak to people, so that you can feel like you're connecting with them honestly. When you take alcohol or something, when you take psilocybin or something, take too much and take too often, you're desperately wanting to connect with nature or whatever. LSD, all these different things. If you're a workaholic, you're desperately trying to work with a sense of fulfillment, a sense of I've generated something that's worthwhile, I've created something, or maybe just, when I get that amount of money and I can buy the Aston Martin, I feel so good about it. I can finally relax for 5 seconds and feel good about myself. The phone, for I think a lot of the teens, is an extremely efficient way of connecting, and through that, the disaster of the kind of connection they're getting, which appears from the outside, from Gen X, I guess, is that they're not getting the kind of connection that they're actually potentially thinking that they're getting, or definitely wanting from this technology. And sure, it'll make me laugh at times. Sure, there'll be something, and I learn, wow, they finally got that stupid container ship out of the Suez Canal. They finally floated that puppy out. Like, seriously, so funny. But in the end, funniest thing this year, seriously. How do you do that?
There's a funny photo on the internet at the moment. There's a semi-trailer that's done the same thing. They've got
in Japan. On the side. I know. The funniest one, though, there's this shot from what's his name? The 80s, Old Behave, that where in one of his movies, he gets stuck in this tunnel and he keeps going forward and back. Have you seen that?
The golf cart.
The golf cart, and they put the container ship on the side going. It's beautiful. It's so clever. The guy should have had a Nobel Prize for thinking of that one. That is very funny. Or girl, or whoever it was. But I think outside of the humor that does come out of it and all that sort of stuff, what we've learned, and certainly through the people who developed it, that they didn't know was occurring when they developed it, or they say they didn't, is that the way that these apps are designed is they're designed to be highly addictive, and that's why they've associated to those apps all of these consumer opportunities, to just buy stuff, and they seem to algorithmically get the sort of stuff that you want quite right, depending on where you swipe and how you use your app, which is kind of scary. But that whole consumption process, consuming our time, consuming my mental energy to a point of addiction, dopamine just overflowing, so that I can, buy more and not actually at a young age actually recognizing that's what's happening. My daughter and many, I'm sure, will swear black and blue that they're not addicted, and yet the behavior is the behavior of addiction. So the query I have is,
you said something I think is it's key to this discussion. So you can point your finger at people writing these programs and the people designing these phones or the laptops or the computers, whatever the media. The key is something you said, is the person. What's going on inside their head? What is it that they actually want? You can make any technology you want. It's what's the other side of the loop, and that's the person using it. So the key is what's going on in their head and what do they want?
Yeah.
Who's providing it?
Yeah, and I think it fundamentally. I know what it's like for teenagers because I work with them, but I've also been one, and that is, we're desperately seeking connection. We're desperately seeking meaningful connection. And, I guess when at the other end of this digital unit, there is the pretense of understanding, the pretense of feeding you back exactly the thing that you think you're looking for. What is it? Facebook knows most human beings better than they know themselves now because of just how they click, where they go and what they like. And so I guess, yeah. So the higher intention though, can't, and I guess, I guess in NLP, what we'd probably ask in this kind of situation is, we'd talk to the part of them that is the drinker or the user or the addict part, and ask them, what is it that you're trying to achieve? What is it that, if you could drink fully and completely, what comes out of that that's even more important? Relax. Okay, so if you relax fully and completely, what comes out of that is even more important? Yada, yada, yada. And you move further and further up the tree, the values, spiritual, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
There might be a point either that's elicited or that is where they reach the point where they can't go any further. And then we ask, well, how many times has drinking that much actually given you that thing? How many times has it actually given you honestly and truly that thing? And generally, I guess we find it doesn't. Seldom gives them that.
Yeah. So here's the curious thing. Let's say, for example, that highest intention is a state of mind, that the drinking, the purpose of the drinking is to get them to a particular state of mind, and you've got them in a sober state. You're asking.
Yeah.
What does drinking do for you? What does drinking do for you? And you achieve in this conversation, in sobriety, they achieve that state of mind because they've just touched it. Well, they're really after that. In that moment, in their sober state, they've actually achieved it. They start to experience it. And we're sitting back going, right, well, you're just experiencing it now. So the question is, how do you generate that for yourself? Without the alcohol. I wouldn't actually say that. I wouldn't actually say without the alcohol because I still want to push them in the direction of the alcohol. But the fascinating thing for me is they can actually touch, whether completely or even just a subtle way, that state of mind that they're actually wanting to achieve through the alcohol, without the alcohol, because we've asked the right questions. Well, how are we going to get to what you actually want? Whatever the nature of the question is, we eventually encourage them to actually touch that part that wants this thing, this experience. So you and I sitting back going, well, you just experienced it. We're saying that quietly. The next step is, how do you do that? You just did it now. How do you do it again? You didn't even do it with alcohol. So it's intriguing. That's That's a challenge. That's fun. And it makes sense.
Are you kind of saying that, because I mean, so are you kind of saying that really what you're saying is, rather than saying, well, listen, mate, just stop drinking, what you're saying is, let's talk about, whatever you're doing is what you're doing. It occurred to me, I was walking down the street the other day, and it occurred to me, this is the best life ever, because this is the only life I have, and this is the only moment I have in this life right now. And there's nothing better or worse, because there's nothing actually exists other than this minute. So in this minute, this is all it is. So, yeah. So it's like, okay. Could be the mushrooms talking, but I don't. Or did I just say that? No, but it could be. But it was like, seriously. No, I love a good field mushroom every now and then. So fundamentally, with butter. But fundamentally, butter and a conscious watcher. But yeah, it's okay. So what we're talking about here really is, you're not doing this work with someone while you're at the pub. You're not like, let's go for a drinking. Let's go drinking, and no, sure, like it's all good. Let's go drinking, and we'll play a few games while we're drinking.
Well, number one, it's not a problem unless someone perceives it as a problem. If someone comes to you or I and says, things have gone really badly with my partner, my kids, my work, and I think it's the drinking. If they've come to that realization and brought that to us, we're not the ones saying it's a problem. They've come to that realization. So you and I never have to say it's a problem. We never have to judge. We never have to say, God, really, you do that? We can just say, well done. You've achieved level 6 drinking. So where do you want to go next? And just keep on going where they're going.
It's really interesting, because I mean, we've both worked with some, all sorts of cases. But I was recently working with someone who was still going through AA, but hadn't had a drink in 6 months, but had an extremely, how would I say, extremely unusual life in terms of their practices, their behaviors, sexually, relationships, all sorts of things. And I have to say that they're going through it, and they've gone through it, they've seen it, they've come out the other end, or they're still going through little bits and that sort of thing. But it's really hard to ruin a life. It's like, what we hear about constantly. You've got to work real hard to ruin a life. And what I mean by is ending up in prison.
You can't do it overnight.
Well, no, you've got to work really hard at it, and sometimes your culture has to work quite hard at it to support the illusions that you're fighting against, or the illusions that you're desperately trying to achieve, and the only way to do it is possibly through nefarious ways, like stealing money, for example. But it's just interesting, because a lot of people who've managed to navigate this have actually come out and they understand stuff. There's a clarity, there's an experience, and which I'm not saying I want to share necessarily, but it's very easy for us to make a judgment that if they're partaking in something that's habitual, that's outside of what we consider to be the okay or normal, that they should immediately be fixed. They should immediately be and certainly judged that way, and then funneled into a position where they can be fixed. And what I think we're seeing more and more is that fixing doesn't occur but the number of the amount of cultural unwellness that needs to be fixed has been increased. You know,
yeah,
like the DSM-5, for example, in psychiatry, you know, which labels, you know, 4 or 5 labels per person, you know, everyone will fit into that. It's just if you turn up or not, you know, you just turn up at a psychiatrist's office, pretty much, you know, and there's probably a pill for it. So, you know, and there's been some New York bestsellers about psychiatry lately, which are eye-opening. But you know, but fundamentally, it's like, you know, and the interesting thing is, there's a great quote that I won't get right from Krishnamurti, who's still being revered even now after his death, is that, you know, trying to align yourself with, you know, insanity, you know, is literally trying to align yourself with a completely broken society, you know, and a society that believes that to fix something is to just throw more money at it. Meanwhile, incarcerating the minorities, incarcerating the mentally ill, you know, whether it's in a box or with a bottle of pills, you know, it's the same kind of incarceration. And it's, you know, all due respect, I mean, you know, medicine has its place. I wouldn't be alive today, and my daughters and my wife probably might not have been if it weren't for medicine. You know, I'm not going to argue with that. And yet there are points where, sorry, but, you know, can we try a different route or route? And I think what you're talking about is maybe the different route is to actually just acknowledge and bring them on board and saying, well, how do you do this? And I think it's a fundamental thing around NLP coaching is, you know, we kind of, I mean, whenever someone brings anything into the room, I'm kind of saying, wow, how do you do that? How do you know when it's time to have a drink, or, you know, or a cigarette smoking? How do you know it's time to have a cigarette? Like, how do you know? You know, what is it in you? Do you know in your body, or is something happening in your head? I mean, I have one person who got this incredibly fast image of a first person associated of a cigarette that had been lit right there. It was like it just randomly popped into their head. Well, not randomly, it was kind of that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was just like a full color. It was like associated. It was like a picture. And I said, man, what? Wow. And it was slightly larger than life. And it sparkled a little bit, I believe. I said, would that work?
When you said it was larger. When you just said it was larger than life for me.
Larger than life. I was like, whoa, yeah, I want to sure give me some more of that, you know. I said, would it work as well? Would you want it as much if it was in black and white? And they never thought about it, of course, because I never even knew that they had the snapshot, you know. They didn't even know until we got down to it. I said, well, and they went like this. Oh, really? It's great. Of course, they kept smoking, and, you know, for the rest of their lives. But it was just, you know, it was just really interesting, rather than saying, well, you shouldn't really smoke, should you? You're just, you know, wasting money and wasting time, and you're just getting up with cancer. You know, and I mean, you know, you can buy the box of cigarettes, and it's got the dead person with their lungs hanging out, and it's got aborted babies and people with eyeballs that have popped, open bowels. It's like, gee.
Funnily enough, they never make the connection to the contents. That's a terrible photo. What was it?
It was only 60 years ago that every doctor smokes Marlboro.
Yes.
60 years ago, every doctor smokes helps you.
It's the flavor I go for.
You know it.
Well, you said something that I think is fantastic. You pick these behaviors that people do throughout society, and there's this umbrella label called well, they're called problems that need fixes. And this is what you said. these things need fixes, and I think that's fantastic. That's what it's come down to. We've sort of stepped back, we've disconnected from these people, and we've only observed the behavior and gone, that's bad, so we need a fix, but we haven't seen the individual.
No.
So the numbers, the statistics tell a problem that need to be fixed. And I think, well, I'm putting it out there, I think that's the problem. To say that these are problems that need fixing. And as you rightly said, you pour more money at it, you'll fix it. But where's the humanity and where's the individuality?
Well, I think
they're doing what they're doing. They're
Yeah.
trying to achieve something to the best of their abilities with these substances, with these behaviors, whether it be a smartphone or a shot of heroin or whatever. We're not looking at the person. We're just saying that's a problem, and I've got to take this shit away from them. You know.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm trying to say from the very beginning. We've lost the. It seems that we've lost the sense of who the individual is.
Yeah, and
And
it's
what we're
obvious
saying is
why.
that what they're doing is wrong.
Yeah, and its why is simple. I call it the commodification of the human spirit body. And what it means is that you can make money out of that. As soon as you, and what did we do?
I throw my hands up.
The first thing that they did when they realized they could was they labeled humans as consumers. So we're not humans anymore. We are consumers of medicine, of petrol, of goods. We're just a consumer of goods. I can't stand the idea. Sure, I breathe and I eat. I'm a consumer. If anything, I'm a generator. I'm a manifester. And if I want to label myself, but I mean the whole
watch those labels.
Well, the whole notion of being something that the only thing I am is doing constantly, just doing. There isn't an am. And so
the notion of a consumer has bugged me for years. It's
disgusting. Well, and it's so detached. It means we have to dissociate from our actual personal spiritual needs to fit with a model that is purely physically based. Like you can't, well, maybe you can, but you can't necessarily. I mean, who was it? It was who was it that wanted to do the first investigations into the human body, and he had to go to the Catholic Church. Remember the story? It was Copernicus. He was the bloody. Anyway, went to the Hippocrates. It was Hippocrates. Had to go to the church. Said, "Well, I want to see how the body works." And the church said, "Well, you have the body, and we keep the spirit." And so there was this whole commodification where suddenly the mechanization, the what do you call it? The deconstruction of the human body through minutiae. Even now we're down to the DNA and the sub-DNA and all that sort of stuff. We still don't understand how any of it works, but we think we do, so we throw stuff at it. But it's a commodity, it's a unit. And in medicine, it's very difficult to have a conversation. I remember friends of my father's were. My main dad, he spent most of his time studying because he was becoming an ear, nose, and throat specialist. And because of developments that are constantly, he was having to study constantly, to keep up with. But you couldn't ask him anything about the liver. You couldn't ask him anything about, no, that's not my area, ear, nose, and throat. And it was like, because it's not even connected. It's just, no, that doesn't work that way. And on one level, that might be true, but the fact is, on just about every other level, in terms of the networking, the neural networking that we now understand more, it's completely, it's kind of like saying that tree over there is completely and utterly separate from the tree next to it. It's just an absolutely ridiculous concept. But what that is that's the deconstruction of the human physiology, just the physiology, leave the spirit out of it, and then the physiology becomes commodified because, well, each unit requires this certain thing because that's what makes it, keeps it well, you know, and yada, 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 yada. And then suddenly there's a market, there's an industry, yeah, that perpetuates this, and we become more, you know, we're not only are we a consumer, but now I'm not a very, you know, I'm a consumer with diabetes. I'm a consumer with, I'm an addiction and diabetes. You know, it's like one thing. And now I'm also, you know, forgive me out there, but I'm also a non-binary consumer with diabetes and a sexual challenge, you know. And so there's just one, I mean, the DSM-5, they just throw that thing at you. Just throw the DSM-5.
I think what you're saying is brilliant. The commodification of the individual. It's the whole concept of relating goes out the window, doesn't it? It's
well, you know,
mind-blowing.
that's really interesting because at the moment, I mean, hasn't it been difficult enough to relate as it is? And now, you know, by law, people have to be separate. People have to be, you know, separated. You know, they've gone into another lockdown in Italy. They've gone to another one in England. They had one, and Europe. A couple of countries in Europe have gone into another lockdown. And then suddenly, so people are like segregated and separated again. They're almost, you know, I mean, it's a horrible thought, but they're almost like locked into the cell of their own home. Some of these apartments, you know, they're not even 50 square meters, so they're locked into this apartment. I'm not allowed to leave except a certain time once a week, or whatever I don't know, whatever it might be. And then, but the only thing they have, it's such an interesting. I was just watching this afternoon. Russell Brand did a really interesting conversation. It was actually also, he was quoting from Naomi Wolf, who's an avid political writer around human rights, female rights, male, just human rights in general now. It used to be just feminism, but now it's a whole thing. And very interesting with respect to the reset that they're talking about, that everyone's, you know, very open about, but this great reset and how everyone will, you know, the quote unquote is literally how everyone will just, they won't need to meet anymore because everyone will be so deeply connected through their, you know, their smart technology. And it's like, no, no, sorry, I'm not a robot yet. I might act like one sometimes, but not a robot yet.
Yeah, they're somehow trying to put a dollar value to each of these steps. You don't have to meet in person, but you can meet on your phone, and as you meet on your phone, you'll have advertisements every 5 minutes or something. You know, it's a way of.
Well, I mean, think of Amazon.
If you meet someone in the park, you're not going to get advertisements thrown in your face. You know,
No.
you're going to be watching pigeons and ducks and possums, and you know, no advertisements
until they have walking robotic advertisement boards. And they're reading off your Bluetooth, working out what you're into, and suddenly a billboard will come out of their chest and go, crackers! You need cheese crackers! Your dog needs biodegradable poo bags!
That's a scary future you're painting there.
Mate, it's so dystopian, but you know, have you seen what's come out of Boston Robotics? Have you seen what those guys have been doing with respect to robots? There's an interesting thing where in Dubai now, they actually have robots riding camels instead of having riders. So they've got robots riding camels in races, yeah. You know, it's like... not that far away, bro. And look, Amazon.
Who needs the human element?
Who needs it? And then Amazon can deliver just about anything by drone to your, you know, apartment balcony or your front yard, or you know, it's not that it's not that far away, really, in technology at the speed at which it's going. Anyway, coming back to the original. So what you're talking about, Keith, is I find it constantly fascinating because it kind of breaks a lot of the rules around how we think about things. And that is that, well, if someone says they're doing something and that thing is obviously wrong, you've got to make them stop doing it. Now, in some instances, I think that's probably a viable idea, and that would be in situations where someone is engaged in violent crime or they're pedophilia or something like that, or just, whatever it might, something where they're damaging others or themselves. So I think you got to stop them. But
context is always the
but once you've got them into a position where you can have a sit down with them, you could then dive in with someone tells me that you're doing this kind of behavior, teach me how to do it. How do you do that? How do you know how do you know when it's time to do that? And the interesting thing about that, in terms of psychology, in terms of modeling, is that we can actually possibly find out really, meaningful things for them that they probably... I worked with an artist. Well, I didn't work with him, actually. What happened was that there's this artist, I can't remember his name, and it's probably good that I can't, and I wouldn't say it anyway, but did the most remarkable and deeply disturbing art. And like, I remember going into his studio one time because a friend of mine said, listen, no, it's actually a client, that's right. A client of mine was working in the same building as the art dealer who was selling this person's work. This person was doing this, just like, you walk into the studio was like a massive 2-story open garage. And you go in there and these massive pieces of work, floor to ceiling, like 6 meters, maybe higher even, like they're just colossal and dark, like, and blood and and you walk in and go, oh my God, what's happened, man? He's smoking, he's got a whiskey bottle and but it was, but my God, the art. Oh my God, and so I sat down with him and I said, someone said, you've had some stuff happen and I just want to kill my father. It was something around his father, and it was about his upbringing and abuse and all sorts of stuff. And I said, so, where are you at with this? And he said, because I was totally on board. I said, gee, I would hate to do any work with you because I'd hate you to stop creating this, because it's like,
absolutely, yeah.
And he was compos mentis, and he was, and he was very aware of the darkness. He was very aware of his deep pain. I said, like, seriously, just out of curiosity, if you kind of, and this was the fear. Fear was interesting. I said, if you did work on this, would you be able to keep doing this painting? She's not like this. He says, no way. He says, I don't know what I do, but I can't do this. And I mean, he was selling this work for a lot of, like, he was about to make quite a significant amount of money out of just this room full of, they should have, Price Waterhouse Cooper maybe, stick it in the foyer. This is what it's going to be like after you've been with us for 10 years. In the front of every bank, Westpac Bank, this is what your soul is going to be like. But anyway, I shouldn't say that stuff publicly. But anyway, but I thought that was so fascinating because there was no way I wanted to go anywhere near. But I remember sitting down with him and totally acknowledging this work and totally and getting totally, and I felt like we were getting in alignment. It was just one meeting we had, but it was like I could not judge this person. I could only feel, I was quite, I think I was a bit petrified in a sense by what was being presented, but I was in awe, that he could get this out and, and make something brutal, just so brutal out of it, and so many of them. It's like, steady on. I'm only got a wee heart. But I guess that, you know, that's that concern. So the interesting thing is also when you're going down the track of, say, working with someone who's been drinking to excess, and we're I guess we're walking in with them and we're querying how they do it and everything. We're not necessarily saying, we're not saying you should stop. We're saying, are there any potential other options? You know, do you have choice in this?
Yes, do you have choice?
You know, do you have a creative kind of aspect to this where you can maybe identify a different behavior that you could incorporate? You know, maybe tiddlywinks while you're drinking, you know. But well, you know, but it's, I mean, I don't want to minimize it, but it's like, it's just a behavior. It's not a disease. It's just a behavior. And as long as it's a behavior, it's malleable. It can be played with. It can be shifted. And there can be more choices around it.
Yeah. We've gone into extremes like alcoholism and drug use. Then there's internet use, and we can bring it home. I mean, as a parent, considering the proposition that I'm making now, I failed utterly in terms of, you know, my daughter's presenting something, a particular behavior or an idea, and I would, the number of times I opposed it. I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know the concept of, well, that's where they're going. They're going in a certain direction. If I acknowledge it, I won't get any resistance at all.
I still do it.
Oh, I'm a lot better.
Oh no, I'm a lot better too, Keith. It's so hard. The entrenchment is so deep. I had a conversation with my daughter the other day. I said, listen, I have no judgment about what you're doing. I have no judgment. I have concerns for your well-being. And so if I just suddenly come in with a fix-it plan, it's not because you're wrong or that I perceive you wrong, it's that I'm worried or I care. And the only way I've learned through my 50 odd years of learning to do that is to come out at you with it, or to give you some, you know, this is, maybe if you try this, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just the last thing that she wants. Wants me to
and
listen.
The fear in us that, you know, if we don't do something, the end is nigh, you know.
Yeah.
It's just that's gonna be it. And I mean, that's twofold too, because we're actually saying to them point blank, you're not capable. And that doesn't win any sort of friendship.
Do you know what I want to say to that though? And it's just occurred to me, but I'm going to call it the last 150 years. You know, even the 40, 30, 20 years ago, let's say 20 years ago, before this massive uptake of cell phones and everything, 2001. You know, could you go online really fast, research just about any symptom that you have in your body and get 1 million hits? At least 20 of them telling you, oh my God, you should see your doctor because, oh my God, this could be cancer, or, going to the extreme version, and having that available to a person who's going through the most hormonally challenging part of their life.
Yeah.
And then, and with that, parallel to that, is all of the images, the movies, the self-help junk where you get people who actually don't have a lot of knowledge, that's never existed. Like you could, like the worst you could have done 150 years ago was go down to the shop, the dairy or the little shop that your town, meet up with a mate and say, listen, I've got a bump, it's got a bit of, it's not looking too good. They say, you got any Rawleys? Stick some Rawleys ointment on it. Sorts of, but I mean, next minute the guy drops dead, but fundamentally it's like, it's just, this is pretty unique. And the amount of information that has to be navigated by people who I don't think are necessarily that well equipped yet to navigate it. I don't know if I am. Now, I woke up this morning going, the internet is a really shitty place. Because there's nothing natural about it whatsoever. There is nothing, we see pictures and we can watch movies and stuff like that, but there's nothing, even in that. We can watch Edinburgh talk about, global warming, we're all going to die if we don't save the penguins, and it's true probably, or it's not, I don't know, but it's pretty compelling because it's David. I went to a market day on Sunday and a mate of mine had a David Attenborough t-shirt.
Yeah.
The picture of Sir David Attenborough on it. I said, what's that about?
Yeah.
It says, global warming, mate. Are you up with it? Global warming? Come on. That's so good. I'm not a denier. I just question everything. It's like, of course it's warming up, and then it'll cool down, and then it'll warm up, and then it'll cool down. I know, off track a little bit, but the challenge with pacing my daughter, for example, walking along with her, is the challenge is, and this is a challenge I think, is I didn't grow up with that. Whereas 150 years ago, the parents would have grown up with what they're going through. The parents' would have grown up with what they go. Sure, there's now a steam train, or a mechanical chariot, they used to call them in the early 20th century, whatever it might be. But fundamentally, it's just, it's neurologically so extremely different,
Yeah. And what's missing is this ability to, as you say, pace.
Yeah.
Someone's going in a certain direction. And if you oppose it, all you get is resistance. If you go with it, no resistance. And there's the potential that the two of us in relation, in conversation, just sharing, expands the world of choices available to us that we can choose from. So that's how I started this conversation, the proposition that doesn't really exist. It seems to me it doesn't really exist.
Not in a general sense. Not in a general sense.
A whole lot of people telling us where we should be going. A whole lot of people telling us all the wrong things we're doing. Give an example. Hopefully my daughter won't get too angry about this. My daughter recently went vegan. She started off vegetarian and went vegan. And as soon as she said it, my initial response was right here in my chest was, oh God. Because it's a huge challenge to get everything you need, right? So I recognized that sensation straight away. Didn't say anything, I just recognized, well, okay. So I was having her over for dinner and right, I'm going to do my best to make you a vegan pizza. She said, that sounds good. And it was awesome. It was fantastic. And so I wasn't resisting. I wasn't pushing against her. I was just going, well, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to do whatever I can to find all the ingredients I can so that this thing that looks like a pizza is going to taste like a pizza. It's going to feel like a pizza. And it was awesome. Wow, so I didn't go against. That's where she wants to go, and she's going to make her own learnings.
And I think that what you also did there was you gave yourself the opportunity to create a new experience. you know. I think the real challenge, I mean, for me at the moment, this always comes back to what we're going through globally. And that is, on so many levels, our choices are being removed one by one, very quickly, very slick. Like overnight, just 4 days ago, we lost control of our water in New Zealand. So the water, even if you, really quite draconian. And you know, so it basically came down to, it was just an overnight thing. There are only, very few people in Parliament at the time to vote on it. Went through its second hearing, and the second hearing got through. So it goes through one or two more. But it was all about just taking away your choices on one of the most fundamental things, in terms of being able to save your own water, being able to use your grey water to flush your toilet with, fundamental things that most of Europe just took on board, at least 50 years ago, because there's just so many people and so little resource, and here we are, like in Christchurch, for example, we have unlimited water. What we've got is draconian, or they're trying to fix it right now, is just these ancient pumps, which we became very aware of. And I'm only going what I've heard on the interviews. We became very aware of it with the earthquake. So the earthquakes, well, 14,000 of them, but the earthquakes occurred, and that shook everything up. Everything had to be piped, pipes exploded, all sorts of stuff. And so suddenly realised you've got these very old pipes. Wellington, our cultural parliamentary centre, the capital of New Zealand, is going through a colossal problem because of the same thing. The sewage, they went through this, they've actually had to take the sewage and actually put it into trucks and drive it for 20, 30 kilometres to a dumping area to dump the sewage, because the pipes are so bad that they've been leaking so badly, but they're so deep, they don't actually know where they are. They don't know where the poo pipes, and some of these pipes are just like they're meters. It's like they don't know, and they've been talking about doing this for 50 years.
Yeah.
And how do we get onto that? How do I get onto poo pipes? And choices. So it's choices. Now here's the thing. So once upon a time, people were just deciding about, well, what do we do? What do we do? How do we do the right thing going forward for expansion of whatever? But the choices are reduced because, well, someone knows someone who owns this company that puts pipes in the ground. So let's get them to tender for it, and we'll see how that goes. But not putting it out to a larger scale, not creating more choices about how to do it, how to design it, how to think about it. And that's the same with the neurology around alcoholism, whatever. There's only one way, because also in New Zealand, we're renowned binge drinkers. It's what we do. We binge drink. The average consumption of alcohol in this country is just unbelievable. Probably very similar in Australia, but certainly what I know is in New Zealand. And so we get a lot of, the negative aspects of that. Not very many positive, except for people who are making it, but a lot of negative. But there doesn't seem to be a choice in our culture about how we relax, how we connect, how we communicate. It's got to be, lubricated by this thing called alcohol. But it doesn't, and I think what we're getting at is, well, our cultural choices are diminishing. And what we have to do is somehow, well, how can that mean we have to increase our inner choices, to discover new ways of feeling fulfilled, feeling whatever, connected or whatever. It's a very long-winded way of saying that, but
no, completely agree. I think it's being taken away. There's too many people going, there are problems that need solutions, and that completely ignores the individual.
Do you know
and the fact that we have the freedom to go in any direction we want to go. And you can call it a problem if you want.
Yeah.
But what if it's a choice that I choose?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like telling a racing driver you shouldn't go that fast. He or she knows the risks, but that's how they get their kicks. I'm not going to try and tell them to stop.
When the first horseless When the first horseless carriage came out, it could do a maximum of 12 miles an hour. Every horseless carriage had someone walking in front with a flag. They thought they'd explode if they went over 20 miles an hour or something. They thought they'd literally blow up. Even though they've been riding horses at God knows what speed for that many centuries. So the essence of what we're talking about is the problem is not a problem. It's a pathway to solution. And the more we bring it, I mean, if I was to use, my little...
Hopefully it's a pathway to choice.
Yes, a pathway to choice, which to many is a solution, but it's a pathway to choice. And one way to engage this behavior is with curiosity, is to go, well, how, what's going on with this? What are you doing it for? What are you wanting to achieve? How do you do it? How often do you do it? Does it work as well if you do it while you're asleep? I can't drink while I'm asleep. Well, what's that like? I don't know, I'm asleep.
It's not an easy one. I know we're talking about it now, and we could probably talk about it a number of times. I just think it's a fascinating proposition. And you said a number of remarkable things that I think have only reinforced what I'm trying to say. It just seems to me that we're going down more of this pathway of not acknowledging the choices that people are making. We're actually negating that and saying, well, this is the way it should be going.
And I think that's an interesting thing. I was listening to Laurie Anderson, one of her newer albums, the one she did after the New York floods and after losing her husband, of course. Sorry?
No.
Yeah. And her husband, Lou Reed. So she was married to Lou Reed. And she's done such remarkable work. And she has a song called Everyone Needs to Ask the Expert. And it's just such a great song because, in America, every talk show they bring in the expert, on national radio they bring in the expert, and ABC and this, they bring in the expert, but the thing that we forget about the expert is they know very little about just about anything else. And in general, I have to be so careful because there are some people out there who are so, like Elon Musk, for example, can't stand the guy on so many levels. And yet when you reading his biography and realizing the scope and breadth of what he can comprehend, I don't know if he necessarily has to understand it. He certainly doesn't necessarily understand human psychology very well, I've heard. But, so some people have this almost, computer-like ability to understand so many things, but they're very, very, very few. But the number of people who I've listened to, and I used to work with at a university, who could tell you every single thing about the one thing that they specialize in, but you couldn't ask them about anything else,
Yeah.
So I sometimes think, Nikola Tesla, even though, he's almost been put into the realm of mythology, the way people talk about him, even though the things that he did pretty much make a lot of our world happen today. He wasn't really a scientist. He wasn't really he didn't have a PhD. He didn't, he was someone who was extremely observant. There's a really great story about a guy named Victor Schauberger, Austrian, I think. And he was a guy who grew up in the mountains of Austria. He was brought up rurally in the mountains, in logging communities where they cut logs and shoot them down the hills and then move them along the lakes and blah, blah, blah. But he grew up watching and fascinated by water and the movement of water and how it worked. He'd sit for hours, days, just watching how does the salmon get up the waterfall? Like how the hell does all that stuff happen? So when he became much older, he started to put everything down on paper and build things. And anyway, so these guys were, the forest guys were cutting down logs. There's a point to this, and it's a metaphor, of course. But he was cutting down logs. And so what they do, sorry, he wasn't, but these companies were, and they had this major problem. And the major problem was, so the logs, spruce, pine, those sorts of things, are straight as a die, straight as it, like seriously straight as an arrow, grown that way, perfectly grown, Austrian. And so, they have these log flumes that are, with water racing, and they stick these logs in and they send them down the straight line, and invariably within minutes, the logs start bundling up and jamming. And they go, well, we can't understand. It's a straight line. The water's going in a straight line. The log's going in a straight. Why do they get? So Victor Schauberger came along and said, well, I can tell you this. It's because nature doesn't work in a straight line. Water doesn't move that way. The logs, if you notice the logs, they turn slightly as they're going, oh, well, what a bunch of ass haters. So anyway, so Schauberger made a precise model of what they were doing, and then a precise model of his solution, in a sense. Now, his solution came out of watching what water did, watching how logs naturally moved when they were in water, watching what happens in a creek, what happens in a river, what happens in all these different situations. Because I don't know, if there's a massive flood and a log gets taken out, like a tree gets taken out by a river, that log will not get stuck. It will just go all the way to the ocean unless the river drops, and then it'll get stuck on the side. But if it's in the torrent, it won't, it'll just keep going. So he built this thing, and so he built it. When they turned up, like the people came from the company and the local district to see what this madman had created. So he had created the perfect log fume, which was straight, and he demonstrated, everything was to scale. He put the log in, and soon enough, they all got jammed up and they fell over and blew over. So anyway, his one, it came down and it bent. And as it bent, water pissed out of one corner. and then he had a bit of water that he'd pulled out of the same flume further up and jammed that in. And then he turned it, and then but water pissed out, another. There's water going everywhere. But every single log got to the bottom. And everyone's going like, that doesn't make any sense, bro. It's like, seriously, that doesn't make any sense. It's like it's leaking. So what we see is a leak. What we see is a broken bit or a bent bit. What we see is a gnarly bit that's slightly going, because parts went uphill. Parts went slightly uphill. It's going uphill, man. You're a nutcase, Meanwhile, the log kind of turns and then goes up the hill and then comes down. It's just, all that sort of stuff. And they're just like, can't work out because it's all to scale. It's all the same weight differentials. It's the same amount of water. All that. It's like, why is this working? It's like a medical person actually looking at the human body as a whole totality, including the spirit, including everything, and saying, actually, I don't know how that works. But if you have someone that observes the way, and can see the different layers of maybe energy or the way someone, Feldenkrais is a great form of physiological. So the person will watch you walk up and down over and over until they get a sense of how your body is interacting with space. It's a great story. I mean, I love that story because, and they still pooed him, but they built it. I said, he's a nutcase, but we'll build it anyway. What have you got to lose? Nothing else works. No. And I think, in terms of so he presented choices, but within the choices, the choice that he presented, he also demonstrated failure, or what was perceived as failure, leaks, bent bits, broken bits, I think, all that sort of stuff. And also, if something did get stuck, it was very easy to manage that. And it was a really fascinating story. but it was all because of understanding how how everything within that system played a part in and was really important in the total system, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that the outcome actually wasn't to get it to the bottom. The outcome was to understand every single part of the movement as it did its thing, as it went down the river, and to kind of like watch that and notice the nuances, And I think that's what's disappearing culturally for us, is nuance. It's just nuance and difference and, all of those gorgeous things we see in nature is just being removed by so many laws around.
Well, we want to turn everything into straight lines, don't we? As soon as we see a difference, we consider it a threat. Everyone should think the same, shouldn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. The invitation is there. It's quite a challenge to recognize that I might think a certain way in the moment, and that if someone else thinks differently, to allow curiosity rather than fear, and try and push against it. It's a challenge.
Is that maybe another discussion which is around values, beliefs?
Could do. As you know, I'm still not convinced about values, but I'm happy to have the discussion.
Sure. Well, I mean, I've been reading a lot about it actually, because I'm doing a workshop on it, and I think the trouble with words is that they create a definition in space, like they lock something down into a defined, meaningful kind of space, but really any word is just a guesstimate at what it's trying to explain, But I think, the concept of things having more value or meaningful to us, in an abstract sense, it has its place. Like, compassion. It's an abstract. It can be. It's a value proposition to many people. And then with that, I might say, well, I believe it's important to feel compassionate towards others. That could be the next step. But valuing compassion could be a useful, kind of notion. I think it's something that I've brought more and more into my world is, just how do I look at this with more compassion? Compassion seems to open up more space for choice.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss it. It's just, the notion of value is not something that it doesn't have a home in my mind at this point in time. So happy to.
Did Grinder ever talk about values?
Not that I'm aware of. Values came in a lot with people like Steve Gilligan and the other guy. What's his name? Forgot his name. He came up with logical levels, which were actually.
Yeah. It's a mess now, anyway. I mean, it's a mess because everyone has their own perception. I mean, once upon a time, it was quite a simple idea. Well, I don't know if it was once upon a time, but there was the concept that you'd have a vision that was enabled by a sense of values that was kind of oversaw your beliefs and then your behavior. It was kind of a very simplistic. I still like it as a framework to work around. But having done some research lately, it's like, oh my God, it's like if you could bring any more to this, you will, and you'll make it so much more complicated. And the elicitation process and the away from and then towards and all that sort of stuff is like, oh, seriously, my meta model just blew out. And it's like, I've never been very good at it anyway, but it's like, and once again, my concern is, okay, so you say something to me about, if I say, I ask you something and you give me a reply, I can check whether it's away from or towards. That can be useful, and and yet it can also be me a judgmental process that I'm, bringing to bear upon that, because I've got this two choices of, well, it's either going to be away from or towards. Now, away from is going to be quite tricky, because it means you kind of got a value that is kind of like, you value not getting hurt. And so that's kind of an away from. So what we want to do is want to work out, well, when you're not getting hurt, what's happening instead? So we can build a strong tool,
Towards.
No, I mean, it's so get it, and in many contexts it's extremely valuable, especially when defining an outcome. But at the same time, there's it's just researching today again. It's like, well, gosh, it's so complex, and in the end, fundamentally, it's really just coming down to, well, what's going on for you right now, and how do you do it? How are you doing that right now? So you want to go for a drink at the pub for your second or third time today. How do you know you want to do that? I don't know. You want to drop the clutch and go at 100 kilometers an hour every time you take off at a green light. So how do you want to do that? How do you what goes on? And they'll go, they make a picture of their head. It's like, whoa! Flames coming out the back of the car. I mean, it's only a Honda City, but I love the sound that it makes.
It's funny that the way you're talking about the complexity, you can really add more and more complexity as much as you want. And it's funny when a lot of us learn the meta model for the first time, and the running joke was that people who learned it became meta monsters very, very quickly. And Frank Puchelik, he was one of the guys that developed NLP. He said, I never ask meta model questions. It's just information that's there, I hear the language forms and I just store it. I'm not going to be a meta monster and go, oh, you just said that. I'm going to pick that up and tear it apart. So he's more interested in running with the person, because most of the time, though, with Frank's work, most of them were alcoholics or criminals. So there's no point picking apart their language. just run with them.
Well, I mean, and literally 99 out of 100 times, if you try to explain any of it, they just go, it's like, what are you talking about? Just fix me. Just fix me. It's like, fair
Instead
enough.
of going, oh, you just said this, you just said, so what?
I mean, I've on occasion had someone who said, oh, that's interesting. But I've only mentioned something because I know that it's a curiosity for them to understand a little bit more depth around how they are or why they are or whatever. But most of the time it's like, oh, don't even go there. Just keep it really simple. It's like same with hypnosis. Hypnosis is like, unless you're out on the street and you're doing instant inductions for street theatre, or you're on stage and you're doing, Andrew Newton, and you've got to induce 20 people at once. It's like, seriously, there's nothing to it. And we're all doing it all the time. So, that, in a sense, is like, well, as the great Milton Erickson would have, agreed that we're all in our everyday trance. And so in a sense, we know incredibly well how to do whatever it is we're doing. We really just need to have someone to sit down in front of us to ask us enough times and in a number of different unique ways how to do it. And then once we can understand that, then we can add more choices to it. And maybe one of the choices that is added to it will actually be able to bring more of what they want, rather than, I think it was Richard Bandler, or it might have been Grinner. I mean, the fundamental essence was just bringing more choices, just developing more choices. And in a way, it doesn't matter how you do that.
No. As long as choices are the result. So, yeah.
So in summary, Keith, We've been going an hour and a half. So in sum, I know it goes so fast. In summary, what is the summary to this that we've been talking about? Because there's been a little bit of dipping and diving all over the place, little metaphors,
Yeah,
conversations.
which has been perfectly fine with me. I like it when it does that. In summary, and I can only speak for myself, in summary, am I aware of those times when I feel complete opposition to someone else's direction or ideas that they present or beliefs? And in those times when I am aware, do I have the choice to run with them, rather than telling them that they're doing life wrong? Do I have the choice to run with them and say, you're doing life perfectly well, and you're going to make excellent learnings, and the two of us together, whatever time we have, can only add, can only offer more options and more choice, just by providing a context where there's greater freedom. I hope I'm making sense, because trying to make ideas concrete and trying to make suggestions concrete might be a trap. But just allowing a context and encouraging an environment where people can be free to make the choices they want to make.
Would it be right to also bring into their awareness the fact that is a possibility? That there are potential choices outside of their default habit, position, addiction, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Which are already internal. As you pointed out, if there's an intention to a behavior, that's already internal to the person. They might be disconnected from it. Okay. You or I or anyone else could certainly invite them to discover that intention that's already within them. And choice can come from that. Lots of choices.
So I guess, the interesting thing is, if someone was watching this who's not in the coaching game or anything, but has also got friends and family, maybe, maybe it's rather, a consideration is, as we'd call it, is pacing the experiences, from our experience with daughters, which we're learning more and more about, is, well, when someone is obviously expressing a problem or demonstrating a behavior that is generally considered unhealthy or addictive, maybe the first thing to do is to park personal judgment and just maybe ask themselves, well, how am I feeling about this? And what do I need to understand more of so I can have a conversation with this person?
Yes, I like it.
Yeah, I'm sort of wondering about, because whether we like it or not, whether we like the behavior or not, we're in conversation with them because we're there in the room, So we've got to make, we don't have to, we can walk away or get angry or whatever, but if we make the most of it, generally that comes out of some degree of curiosity or some degree of openness.
Yeah.
There's a thing that keeps. No, please.
So, yeah, if I acknowledge that if I do go into a type of fear because of the behavior they're doing, as you say, if I become the first reference, okay, it's my fear. Do I want to project it onto them? If I don't, okay, well, let's find out what that fear is all about first.
Yeah, and you could ask yourself, what is this fear that I'm feeling trying to achieve? What does it want for me? And in general, it'll be safety, security, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then we can
Yeah.
maybe look at it. You know, the really interesting thing about stuff like that is you can immediately say to yourself, well, I'm actually in a room with just one person, and that person is just telling me about something that they feel. There's actually nothing to be frightened of. So what if I just sit back and listen? You know, it's like there's a logical aspect to that, you know. And the least that's going to happen, the very least, is you're going to hear something that maybe opens up your mind to more ways of experiencing the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the worst that can happen, really. You know, I mean, of course, you've got to like say, well, are they brandishing a knife or are they holding a? You know, there's certain context.
Yes.
You know, of course,
Context is everything.
outside of that obvious stuff, you know,
if there's no immediate threat, yes.
Yeah.
I have the time to go and say, it was my fear. I want to address that first, and then I can actually talk to the other person with a lot more flexibility.
Yeah.
And demonstrate a lot more freedom.
Yeah.
More of that sort of freedom. So
the thing that really
we've proposed something huge, and I don't expect anyone to take this on board.
No. Well, I mean, let's be fair. I mean, huge, maybe. You know, but I mean, the analogy is it is our nature. Think about this. When you're not walking along a beautifully paved bloody road or something, you know, once upon a time that didn't exist. Nowadays, if there's a slight deviation in the path, they've got to put a couple of yellow cones out and a sign saying tripping hazard. But once upon a time, you'd just be walking across fields or you'd be walking whatever. Now, what did your body have to do? It had to adjust itself constantly. Not only that, you might have been in a place where there's wild animals. In Australia, Christ, there's still wild animals, and everything's trying to kill you when you live in Australia. How are those photos of all the spiders on the fences when the flooding happened? Don't even. My daughter would have a heart attack. There were spiders.
Yeah, they've got to. They drown.
Got to go somewhere, but I mean, could they just kind of like levitate for a while? Get little spider boats, you know, like, no, we're going on the boat. I can put out a whole bunch of spider. Oh my God. Anyway, I don't even know what I was talking about. Those spiders, far out. Oh, that's what it was. So we know how to adapt. We know how to choose. We know how to listen. We know how to see. We know how to feel. We have intuition. Now, what's happened in a mechanized, commodified, industrialized, deconstructed world that we now live in, which is hugely policed. You know, people being locked up for choosing not to wear a mask. For fuck's sake, that's their own problem. You know, there's that great meme of the woman sitting there in a wheelchair, fully masked up, everything, losing her absolute shit at a woman who's standing next to her with no mask on. What's your problem? You've got the mask on. You know, it's like, I mean, you know, on one logical level, I can totally understand it. On the others, but at the same time, it's like, well, this person has no choice point. They have no. They've taken on the law, which isn't actually a law. It's just a directive, and taken it on as the absolute only way to survive this thing. Well, fair enough. But, you know, that's your choice in your world. And you can't get the disease from a person who's not carrying, because if she was carrying it, she'd be in hospital or she'd be in isolation. But if she was carrying it, you can't, you know, it's like, so this concept of choice, this concept of another person who chooses to do what you're not doing because you're doing everything right, that person is not allowed.
Mm.
So that's not natural.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not a natural existence. There's nothing natural. There's nothing even actually in the organic nature of the world. There's nothing actually that makes sense about that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's just nothing adaptive, flexible, adjusted,
Yeah.
healthy. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you know, I'm wrong.
Ah, we could talk about choice forever. We probably will, because it's becoming very rare. It's on
Well, I
the
think it is.
species extinction list.
Yeah, and I think, interesting enough, there is this perception that we have more choice than we've ever had. But our choices are dictated to us.
Mm.
You know, politically, religiously, consumer-wise. Well, you can choose any kind of fashion accessory you like out of these different labels. You know, great. Like, when was that even natural? You know. On a final note,
Yes.
I was talking to a friend the other day, and it occurred to me, you know, have you ever had one of those experiences where, you know, you just go to the kitchen and you get yourself a glass of water because you're thirsty? You know, you just go to the kitchen, you grab yourself a glass of water, and you walk back into the living area, and someone looks at you and says, "Oh, did you get anyone else one? Did I don't did you ask?" Like, you know, imagine that in nature. Like, you go and you know, and there's no houses or anything. It's just nature, you know. But I'm in nature, and I drop down by a little creek and I make myself a little cup out of some frickin' thing, you know, and I bend down, and suddenly I get a tap on the shoulder. You know, one of the bears goes, where's my glass of water? Hey. And then a tree sort of bucks up and says, "Mate, I'm parched over here. I'm 20 meters away. Where's Mike? Did you offer me?" It's just, where do we get these notions? And there'll be people out there going, "Yeah, but it's just courtesy." No, it's not. There's no such thing as courtesy. You made that up. It's a made-up word to describe a made-up behavior. Like, I feel thirsty. I don't care if anyone else does or not right now.
Yeah.
I just want to drink water. That's
You've
it.
got to think about everyone else.
You're so
got to
selfish. Just, what a horrible man. Oh, you, no. Oh, well, I'm never going to ask you in the future if you want one when I feel like, and I was like, then don't, because I've got legs, hands.
Yeah. I love is the word hypocrisy? I love it. It's people go, I hate the way they're telling our children to put everyone else before them. And then this comes up, you know, your child will go and get a drink of water. Did you think of anyone else? It's like, oh, come on. The child's going, where do I go?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, it really is. All right, there you go. See you, Keith.
See you, Aaron.